My name is Eveline Hart. I'm 55 years old. A retired teacher who people often describe as steady or dependable. They mean it kindly, I think, but there are days when it feels like another word for invisible. Dependable mothers don't make demands. They don't expect candles, or cards, or even the smallest pause in the family's rhythm to acknowledge them. This morning should have been different. It was my birthday. I woke with a flicker of hope, though I scolded myself for it. Old habits die hard. I checked my phone before I even got out of bed. No messages. The family group chat that usually buzzed with chatter about Marissa's in-laws was silent about me. By the time the sun edged above the Milwaukee skyline, I already knew what kind of day it would be. At lunch, I walked to the corner bakery and bought myself a cupcake. One of those oversized ones crowned with a swirl of buttercream. I carried it home in a little white box, set it on the kitchen counter, and struck a match. The flame wavered against the window glass. I whispered a wish, blew it out, and clapped softly as though the sound might fill the emptiness of a dining room that once rang with laughter when my husband was alive. Meanwhile, Marissa had just hosted another lavish affair the weekend before for her mother-in-law, Vivian, a garden party, complete with a white tent, floral centerpieces, and even a string quartet on the lawn. The photos spread across social media in glossy detail, Vivian smiling as guests toasted her, Marissa, radiant, beside her. I clicked through them, heart heavy but not surprised. She had organized everything down to the last monogrammed napkin, yet somehow forgotten me again. It wasn't the first time. When I turned 50, she called 2 days late, excusing herself because Ethan's firm had thrown a dinner for his parents. When I turned 53, she sent flowers that arrived wilted, claiming she must have ordered them too close to the date. Each year brought another excuse, always some larger event, some bigger priority. I set down the empty cupcake box and stood at the window, watching the gray March light settle over the city. A thought rose quietly. Like the match's smoke, maybe it was time to stop waiting for what would never come. And so, without announcing it, I decided this birthday would be different. The morning after my birthday, I woke with the familiar weight pressing against my chest. In years past, I might have dialed Marissa, offering her an easy reminder. Guess what day it is, just to give her the chance to save face. This time, I didn't. The silence felt strange at first, like leaving the house without locking the door. But it was mine. I dressed in a soft gray sweater and walked toward Milwaukee's 3rd Ward, letting the brisk wind off Lake Michigan sting my cheeks awake. The old warehouses turned art studios and antique shops were bustling, their windows filled with oddities, tarnished silverware, oil paintings of strangers long gone, shelves of porcelain teacups no one had touched in decades. I drifted through them slowly, running my fingers along the edges of carved oak chairs and glass perfume bottles, as if I could gather pieces of forgotten lives and hold them in my hands. At noon, I ducked into a little French cafe tucked between 2 galleries. The tables were pressed close, the air fragrant with butter and espresso. A young waitress greeted me with a warmth that felt startling, as though she could sense the hollow in my day. I ordered quiche and a glass of white wine. Eating alone no longer made me self-conscious, though there was a time when I would have imagined everyone's eyes on me. Now, I almost enjoyed it, the freedom of not having to smile or nod at conversation that left me weary. Between bites, memories of my late husband, Daniel, came flooding back. He had been the one who noticed the smallest things, how I hummed when I folded laundry, how I always paused to smell lilacs in May. Every birthday, no matter how lean the years were, he found a way to make me feel cherished. A picnic by the lake, a handwritten note slipped into my book, even just a candle in a homemade cake. Since he'd been gone, the absence of that tenderness had grown sharper with each year. Staring into my wine glass, I realized I'd allowed neglect to harden into routine, shrinking myself into the corners of my own family. Something in me shifted that afternoon. I promised myself I would no longer beg to be remembered. If celebration was to happen, it would come from my own hands. I paid the bill, stepped back into the cold air, and felt the silence settle over me, not as emptiness, but as a beginning. 2 weeks after my quiet birthday, a letter arrived in the mail from the school district. I slid it open at the kitchen counter, not expecting much beyond another pension notice. Instead, the words blurred for a moment as I read them, a one-time payout from my retirement fund. After decades of teaching, the district had recalculated benefits, and I was due a lump sum of nearly $80,000. I held the paper in my hands, my heart pounding as though someone might burst through the door and snatch it away. It wasn't a fortune, but for me, it was freedom. My first instinct was to call Marissa. Old habits die hard. But I stopped myself. I could already hear her voice. Bright, but distracted. That's great. Mom, you should think about helping with Ethan's business. Or worse, we could use that to finally finish Vivian's kitchen remodel. The thought made me fold the letter carefully and slide it into a drawer. This was mine. That night, unable to sleep, I sat at my laptop and began searching. Houses, cabins, cottages, places where life could be my own. I didn't want a mansion, just a retreat. Silver Lake, Michigan, appeared again and again in the listings, only a 2-hour drive from Milwaukee. Dotted with cottages that overlooked still water fringed with pine. One photo made me stop, a weathered Cape Cod style, pale blue with white trim. Its wooden deck stretched out toward the lake. It looked quiet, almost shy, like it was waiting for someone who would finally see its worth. The next morning, I called the listing agent, a woman named Patricia, whose voice carried both warmth and practiced efficiency. She promised to send me more details, and within hours, I was scrolling through room after room. The kitchen was dated, the paint peeling in spots, but the bones were good. I could already imagine morning coffee on that deck, evenings with a book by the stone fireplace. Before moving forward, I met with an attorney downtown, Mr. Rourke, whose office smelled faintly of leather and coffee. He suggested placing the property into a revocable living trust, ensuring no one could pressure me to use it as collateral or divide it without my consent. I signed the papers, feeling a rush of control I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting to be celebrated. I was preparing to unlock something entirely my own. The day of the closing arrived cold and bright, sunlight spilling through the wide windows of Patricia's office in downtown Milwaukee. A thick stack of documents sat in front of me, each page bristling with legal jargon. My hands trembled as I signed, one signature after another, until the last page lay complete. Patricia slid the folder back with a smile and placed a small brass key in my palm. I closed my fingers around it, the metal cool and solid, like proof of a promise I had made to myself. That evening, I drove north to Silver Lake with the key tucked in my coat pocket. The cottage was empty except for dust and silence, but it felt alive to me. I set up an air mattress in the middle of the living room, unpacked a cooler of groceries, and sat cross-legged on the bare wooden floor eating cheese, bread, and apples. The sound of water lapping against the dock drifted through the cracked open window, as comforting as any lullaby. The first night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house startled me. Every shadow caught my attention. But by dawn, I was on the deck with a blanket around my shoulders. The sky softened to pink, and the lake mirrored the color, smooth as glass. I raised my phone and captured the moment, the light spilling across the boards, the quiet curve of the shoreline. A private thought struck me. This was the first birthday gift in years that felt real. Back inside, I scrolled through the photos, hesitating. I rarely posted on social media, but something inside me wanted to mark this. Without overthinking, I uploaded the best shot and typed, "Weekend peace." Nothing beats lake life. Then I set the phone down and went about unpacking. By the time I returned to it, hours later, notifications buzzed across the screen. Friends had filled the comments with congratulations, little hearts and exclamations. For once, their excitement felt uncomplicated, warm. Then I saw it, Marissa's comment, sharp against the others. "What house? Where are you? Explain?" I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. After decades of silence, I hadn't realized a single picture could shout louder than anything I'd ever said. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications stacked one after another until I turned the sound off. When I finally opened the app, my simple sunrise photo had become a battlefield. Marissa's first comment had been demanding, but now there were more. "Why didn't you tell me? Where did you get this money?" Then Ethan's name appeared. His words clipped and cold. "We need to talk. You can't make decisions like this without consulting family?" Consulting family. His family. I thought bitterly. Aunts, cousins. Even my sister chimed in with shocked exclamation points and hesitant congratulations. The tone shifted quickly when they realized Marissa hadn't known about the house. "Didn't you help with this?" Marissa. "Thought your mom was strapped for cash?" My stomach tightened as I scrolled, realizing I had never imagined one small post could unravel so much. That evening, Marissa called, her voice sharp, nearly hysterical. "Mom, what were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I bought a house," I said quietly. "For myself? You don't understand." She snapped. "We've already put deposits down for Vivian's banquet. The hall, the caterer, the florist, all of it. Everyone's expecting the event of the year. We counted on you helping, like always." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Counted on me without asking, without even mentioning it. How much I asked. 20,000 more by Friday, she said, her voice cracking. "The vendors want the balance in 48 hours or they cancel." A silence stretched between us, broken only by her ragged breathing. She wasn't worried about me, or even about the money itself. She was terrified of humiliation, of Vivian's judgment, of guests whispering behind her back. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. My decision to quietly celebrate myself had pulled the rug out from under their careful image. By protecting what was mine, I had exposed what was never solid to begin with. "I'm not your safety net." "Marissa," I said. Steady but soft. Her gasp filled the line, followed by a rush of anger I let wash over me. When the call ended, I set the phone on the counter and stood very still, realizing this storm had only just begun. Marissa invited me to dinner that Thursday. Her voice on the phone had carried a brittle edge, too polite to be casual. I knew walking into their suburban house that this wasn't about food. The table was set with stiff precision linen napkins folded sharply, wine glasses already poured. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, while Marissa fidgeted with her fork. Across from her, Vivian presided like a queen in her jewel-toned blouse, lips pressed in a thin, judgmental line. I took my seat. Feeling the weight of eyes on me, Vivian wasted no time. "Eveline, I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Though one wonders why such a purchase needed to be secret. Families should be transparent. Don't you think secrecy is a bit selfish? Marissa winced, but said nothing. Ethan cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside, a crisp loan application waited, the co-signer's line empty. "We need you to help us finalize the financing for the banquet," he said evenly, as though it were a foregone conclusion. "Just a signature. It's safer with you as guarantor." I opened the folder, glanced at the numbers, then shut it. Slowly, I reached into my bag and withdrew my own papers, the trust documents Mr. Rourke had prepared. I laid them flat on the table. "The lake house is in irrevocable trust," I said quietly but firmly. "It can't be touched. Not as collateral, not as leverage. It belongs to me alone." The silence that followed was thick. Ethan's face hardened. Vivian gave a low, incredulous laugh, shaking her head as though I were a foolish child. "Finally!" Marissa broke. Her voice cracked, raw and urgent. "The vendors are threatening to cancel. Mom, $20,000. They want it by Friday or the whole thing collapses. Do you understand what that means? Everyone will know. Vivian's friends, Ethan's partners. It'll be humiliating." Her eyes glistened, but I recognized the fear behind them wasn't about me. It was about image, about keeping up appearances. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying myself. For the first time in years, they had cornered me at a table and I wasn't reaching for a pen. The room seemed to shrink after Marissa's outburst. The clatter of forks had stopped. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt loud. Vivian leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed, as if waiting for me to crumble. Instead, I stayed still, my papers resting untouched on the table. Marissa's composure cracked first. Her face flushed, her breath shallow. "You don't get it," she said, almost whispering at first, then louder. "I can't keep up with her. Vivian compares me to every other daughter-in-law she knows. The banquets, the charity drives, the trips. I thought if I could pull this off, she'd finally stop just once looking at me like I'm not enough." Her hands trembled as she twisted her napkin. Vivian scoffed, but Ethan's expression betrayed something darker. He rubbed his temple, then admitted, "My bonus was cut this year. I didn't tell Marissa right away. We thought well. I thought if we kept up appearances, things would bounce back. Your money would have covered the gap until then." He glanced at me, unflinching. "You've always stepped in. Eveline, why should this time be any different?" A strange calm settled over me. I had expected their anger, but not this naked desperation. "Because my life," I said, my voice steady, "is not a credit line for your appearances." The words landed heavy. Marissa's tears slipped free, her anger dissolving into quiet sobs. Ethan looked away, jaw tight, while Vivian's lips thinned into silence. For once, no one rushed to fill the air with excuses. I gathered my trust papers, slid them back into my bag, and stood. The reality hung clear between us. There would be no rescue, no bailout this time. The vendors would not be paid. The banquet would collapse. And the carefully constructed image Marissa had fought to uphold would crumble with it. Marissa buried her face in her hands. "Maybe it's better this way," she murmured, almost to herself. "I can't keep pretending." It was the first honest thing she'd said all night. And though she looked small in that moment, humiliated, exhausted, there was a flicker of relief in her eyes, as if the weight of perfection had finally cracked. I left them at the table, the silence no longer mine to carry. 2 days later, Marissa asked me to meet her again, this time without Vivian or Ethan. We sat across from each other in her kitchen, the remains of untouched coffee growing cold between us. She looked pale, her eyes swollen from crying, her usual polished confidence stripped away. "Mom," she began, voice rough. I know I've asked too much, expected too much, but I can't lose you over this. Tell me what you want from me. Please. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. What I want is simple. Marissa, I will not bankroll your parties, your debts, or anyone else's expectations. My boundaries are not open for negotiation. If you and I are to have a relationship, it has to be built on respect, not obligation, not money. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but she just nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. The kitchen door swung open and Vivian swept in, her perfume preceding her, fury radiating from every inch of her. This is outrageous, she snapped. You would let an entire family event collapse just to make a point. Do you realize how humiliated Ethan and Marissa will be? I turned to her calmly. Their humiliation doesn't come from me. It comes from pretending to be something they're not. Vivian's face flushed crimson. With a sharp inhale, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the front door slamming like thunder behind her. Ethan had been lingering in the hallway, silent until then. He looked at Marissa, then at me, and said nothing. His shoulders sagged as he retreated upstairs, leaving only the sound of his footsteps fading. The room fell quiet again. Marissa stared at the table, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you didn't need any of it. The calls, the cakes, the celebrations. You always seemed so strong, like you didn't need acknowledgement. I thought I could let it slide. I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly on hers. Needing less doesn't mean deserving nothing. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in years, she looked at me not as a resource, not as a fixture in the background, but as her mother. The following spring, when the lilacs bloomed and the lake thawed to its soft blue shimmer, I turned 56. The cottage had changed in a year, walls freshly painted, shelves lined with books I'd collected, curtains sewn from fabric I chose on a whim. Everywhere I looked, the house carried the weight of my choices, a quiet bloom of my own presence. I set the dining table with simple plates and a vase of tulips from the farmer's market. Jordan arrived first, swinging a bottle of wine in one hand and hugging me tight with the other. Finally, she said, laughing. A proper birthday for you. Behind her came the Wilsons from next door, carrying a warm apple pie wrapped in a checkered cloth. Soon, the kitchen filled with chatter, the smell of cinnamon and corked wine, the kind of noise that wraps around you like a blanket. As dusk fell, we moved out onto the deck. The lake caught the last streaks of pink and gold, and I thought, this is enough. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring the day against someone else's plans. I wasn't waiting for permission to feel celebrated. Then headlights appeared on the driveway. I froze, glass in hand. As Marissa stepped hesitantly out of her car, she carried a cake tin, both hands gripping it as though it might steady her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders drawn inward. Hi, Mom, she said softly, approaching the deck. Her eyes flicked toward Jordan and the neighbors, then back to me. I baked this. It might not be perfect, but happy birthday. She set the cake on the table and opened the lid. The frosting leaned unevenly to one side, and the candles stuck out at odd angles, but my throat tightened at the sight. For once, it wasn't about show. It was her hands, her effort, her presence. Everyone fell quiet as she lit the candles. The flames flickered in the lake breeze. Fragile, but bright. I closed my eyes, drew in a deep breath, and blew them out. When the smoke curled upward, I felt lighter. Not because the cake was flawless, Not because the house was full, but because, finally, I was seen.